Okay, so 0, 0, that must mean that I'm not included in the viewership here. Um, this is the first time I've done this in the middle of the day. It's now 3 p.m. UK time. I won't make this one too long because I do want to be productive today, get some tidying done. But if anyone logs in, feel free to ask me questions, share comments about maybe recent videos you've seen, anything like that. As always with these live stream videos, I don't have any sort of plan to talk about. It might just be a bit spontaneous, something that could be on my mind at a particular time. So today I watched the original Godzilla, 1954. It was actually quite, I wouldn't call it a sort of cheap B monster movie. It was quite sophisticated in the sense that it had overtures of being against atomic testing or H-bomb testing. I'm not going to really talk about any particular subject until people interact because that's why I do these videos. So if anyone logs in, please say hello. Hello, Declan. I can always count on your loyalty with these videos. So good afternoon. Anyone else, just feel free to say hello, ask questions. I was just saying I've watched the original Godzilla today, and I'm going to watch a video on YouTube, which is the history of movie dinosaurs. Although Godzilla was technically a sort of hybrid monster type creature, but I watched Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom recently, and there's a sad scene in that film actually where the world kind of collapses. It's a volcanic eruption, and you see the Brachiosaurus kind of wailing in the distance. Quite sad. It's up there with the Land Before Time, Littlefoot's mother dying. Um, like I say, I won't make this one massively long, maybe to about 1/2 past or 3:40, something like that. But it is very dependent on cheers, Declan. So notifications come up. Yeah, like I said, it's the first time I've done this in the middle of the day. My sleeping structure's getting a little bit back to normal now, so hopefully that will be consistent for health reasons. So 3 people logged in. Okay, guys and girls, if you have any questions or anything you want to bring up, feel free. To be honest, I'm probably going to be a lot more interactive with my subscribers in this format than in the videos themselves. That is to say, I'll try to get back to comments on the videos. I'll still be making videos, but I'll probably be more interactive on this just because of the nature of it. So, and if you miss one, by the way, not to worry, I'll be doing this quite periodically. So, I mentioned I watched the original Godzilla today, 1954. Another film I was watching yesterday was The Ten Commandments, an old sword and sandal epic with Charlton Heston. It was pretty good, but what I find about films from that era is they're quite stagey. And I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way, but they're very, it's not a natural way of talking. Um, that's okay, Declan. No, I didn't really say much. I was just talking about films I've been watching. I've got 5 people logged in now, so anyone else there, feel free to say hello, ask questions. Um, yeah, so those old matinee films, they had a different style, particularly the sword and sandal epics, biblical films. They were very sweeping in scale, costumes and so on, but the scripts always sounded a little bit scripted, not natural. Like that's not the way people speak. And the Lord saith unto thee, and okay, it's taken from the Bible, but even in the actual screenplay, that's not a criticism, it's just different from, an epic that you would see today. Um, I was reading newspapers, I came across a report which people who've been long subscribed to my channel will already know this about me, but I've always had strong views on crime. I read about these girls in the Midlands somewhere. They attacked love rivals. They're both 24. They attacked love rivals in a pub with their stilettos. But bear in mind, a woman's stiletto heel is sharp, you know. Um, and they got tagged for that, an electronic tag and a £300 fine, but no custodial sentence. So I've long felt that justice in this country has definitely went in the wrong direction, and I think too many judges are excessively lenient. But there's another side of this. I think that too often violent women get away with things that violent men wouldn't get away with. I think if they were violent men, they'd be in prison, and rightly so. Um, Old childhood cartoons, they still have the vibe. Absolutely. For example, I grew up with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, not the more contemporary Walden Media version, but the BBC version. It's not well known today, but it was very special to me. I grew up with it. C.S. Lewis was from Belfast, where I was born, and I remember those adaptations. I mean, okay, there were people in beaver suits. There were a bit. It was kind of BBC props, but there was a certain magical quality about them. I really enjoyed that. Cartoons, maybe not so much, but occasionally I'll just look at things that I might remember from childhood. Some that come off the top of my mind might be. I used to watch The Animals of Farthing Wood, which was a British series. Trying to think what else. 90s TV in my family, we used to always have yeah, I think I probably watched Thomas the Tank Engine as a very young kid, but not. I'm thinking a little bit older, maybe 10. My dad used to always wind me up with that. He used to have this thing where I'd be with some friends in a house party, and he'd say, "Oh, Nathan, your Tommy the Tank Engine books have arrived." It's kind of his sense of humor. Um, so yeah, I think nostalgia. I think there's nothing wrong with adults looking back to nostalgia. I think that's a totally normal, natural thing. Uh, Um, I think there's, I don't know the philosophy of it, but I think it's quite normal. Um, I remember 1990s television. We used to always have what I would call Saturday night TV. There'd be like the Gladiators, the original Gladiators, Crystal Maze, the Generation Game. I'm talking here about British shows. Um, Blind Date. You know, those sort of things were very popular on Saturday night. Strange but True. I don't know if you remember that, Declan. Strange but True. Or 999 Lifesavers that used to really scare me, which was based on real cases. Um, but basically, something changed in the 2000s when reality TV started getting more hype. Things like Big Brother, and of course, as we've previously discussed, Jeremy Kyle, etc. So I do have a bit of nostalgia for the 90s. Um, I found with older millennials, that is people in their late 20s to mid 30s, we still remember a time before social media. We still remember a time when that sort of thing was the norm. So I'm kind of pleased in some ways to be an older millennial that we can actually remember that. I mean, my little niece and nephews are growing up at a time where they won't know anything but social media. So in a sense, we straddle two generations. So if anyone else logs in, remember as I'll ask questions. Um, Oh, Declan, you're a lot younger than me, so I'm 35. Don't know why, Declan, but I thought you were maybe a little older. I'm not saying you look older, just the way you speak and so on. I don't know. 2005 to 2009. Um, Trying to remember television from that time. I didn't, for a long, long time, I haven't really watched TV except the periodic documentary and news. I don't really watch TV. I mostly watch films. 2005 to 2009. Well, I was at university from '04 to '09. So 21. You were born in 1999, Declan, is that right? So I guess you don't remember 9/11 directly. Because I have an American friend, she's 22, and you'd be at the very tail end of millennials. Actually, we might even be a different generation, which makes me sound old, but um, yeah, 1999 is the year I went to the United States with my family. So, what sort of shows would you think about from the late 2000s, Declan, because, like I say, for a long time I haven't really watched. I haven't sort of checked into any particular TV show in a loyal way. I did watch Downton Abbey, but that was only after it aired because I actually got a DVD from my mother and I watched it and I really liked it, so I just watched it that way. I did watch one show called Humans with Gemma Chan. I quite enjoyed that. It was about synthetic humans that are kind of a near future Britain. It was quite an interesting show from the mid 2010s. But honestly, I don't watch that much TV. I know Peaky Blinders has been recommended to me, but I've part of the problem with television is I think you need the discipline to just tune in at the right time. And I've never went for Netflix. It's rainy here in Sunderland. How about Norfolk? Is it what's the weather like down there today? Only got two viewers at the moment, so I'm not sure who the other person is. Remember, people, if you log in, do let me know your presence so that we can engage. If I do this, I may have no way to know what time more people will be active. I just do that spontaneously. 1998, I was in, just starting secondary school then. Yeah, so I remember 9/11 directly, and it's strange because that event was before social media, and it was there's a real sense of fear at the time. I mean, you'd have to really remember it directly to know what that was like. It's incredible. It's almost 20 years ago now, yet it heralded the start of the 21st century. I guess Norfolk and Suffolk tend to be quite wet anyway, but I don't know. That's my perception. It's quite a wet part of the country. So I've got two viewers here. I don't know if one of those is myself or not. Okay, I may actually round this up soon because I do actually need to use the dent. And oh, it's one of the driest regions. Okay, I didn't realize that. I think I just had in my mind the Fens was like marshland. It required a lot of water, but maybe I've mistaken that. Um, Maybe that's more towards Cambridge. Gets fairly wet here in Sunderland, though not as much as the northwest. County Down in Northern Ireland, very wet. So, Declan, here's a question: what's the earliest news event you remember directly? I know you have somewhat of an interest in current affairs as well. What would be the first news event that you remember? For me, it was the death of Princess Diana, although I wasn't really interested in it. I just remember my dad coming in and telling me and my brother. But 9/11 was the first event I actually took interest in, actively took interest in. And I really do need to use the gents. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to end this live stream, but I will. I'm just going to go let this run. If anyone has any questions, feel free to post them, and I'll answer when I come back. 2 or 3 minutes. I really do need to go, and I don't want to be crude about it. So I'll just let this run. If you have any questions, just post them here, and I'll address them when I come back. 2 or 3 minutes. Cheers. Hey, I've been back. I've come back, I should say. Hello, Carl. Welcome. Um, okay, Declan, have you heard of Trump catching COVID? Uh, to be honest, can't remember, but I remember them talking about crime adverts that happened. I'm with you, I have strong views of crime and definitely bullying. Yeah, and the two are actually closely linked. I think, in a sense, the way criminals behave, it's a sort of bullying of wider society, in a sense, particularly the job culture where you get people absolutely worn down. Um, yeah, I've heard of Trump catching COVID. It seems to be the main news right now. The thing is with this administration, Carl, I'll come to your question in a second. The thing with this administration is they're downplaying it, but I think they would do that. If it was serious enough, then they'd have to invoke the 25th Amendment. Now, as far as I recall, this was last used outside of assassination. First Lady Edith Wilson was acting as president, although she had no formal political office, and its cabinet was basically kept in the dark over that. I believe it was the last 17 months of his presidency. Woodrow Wilson, 1918. Carl, just a random question. Have you heard about the German wings crash? Yeah, I think you're referring to the one. Well, there was one in France a couple of years ago. I think it was German wings, and it was the pilot was thought to have either had some sort of depression or something, deliberately crashed that flight. It was very high profile case, pretty severe. I think well over 100 people were killed in the French Alps, but it was German wings. I think that's the same one you're referring to. Yeah, school can be a very tough time. I mean, the thing about bullying, it can happen anywhere. It can happen in the workplace. It can happen. I think it's a big problem in the armed forces, um, and also the emergency services. I think the police, the fire service, and the armed forces are rife for a sort of environment, a machismo where people think that there's a fine line between banter and wearing someone down. For me, banter ceases to be banter when it's constantly aimed at an individual as opposed to a collective thing. I certainly can relate. I was horrendously bullied at school. And the thing is, I left Northern Ireland again in England, so I never quite escaped it. But then by sixth form, it started changing. So Declan, if you don't mind talking about it, would you say that you have some learning difficulties, or do you have a particular disability? You don't have to mention this publicly, but wondering, was there something that you feel that you were bullied about? And Carl, you mentioned German wings. Was that from an air crash investigation or something like that? I follow events very closely on the news, and I collect newspapers, so I've quite a good head for chronology of things. And I do. The name certainly rings a bell. German wings. I think it was about 2016, 2017, something like that. Actually, one thing about 2020 this year has been pretty good for aviation. One reason being that flights have greatly declined this year, but as far as I can tell, there's only been four major accidents worldwide this year, or incidents. There was, of course, a shoot down over Iran in January. There was a big crash in Karachi, Pakistan. There was one in India, and a few others. There was one in which the basketball star Kobe Bryant died. But really, if you compare 2020 to other years, this year hasn't had many major aviation disasters, so that's a good thing. Then I think there's been a lot of side effects from COVID. And this has got nothing to do with anything except that it's seasonal. Got these candles the other day at a shop called Home Bargains, Halloween themed candles. So pretty good value, 2.99 each, and they're big chunky candles, so they'll last a while. I have a condition called growing developmental delay, which affects your learning both physically and mentally, and also affects my communication. Has that got any connection to autism or anything like that, or is it totally separate? The reason I'm asking is I have friends with autism, and that can affect communication issues. I have to say though, the way you communicate here seems totally okay. It's certainly not noticeable from your comments, for what it's worth. But it's I think bullying is disgusting that people can be targeted. Well, why are bullied the way they are? We could say it's to make themselves feel good, etc. But I could certainly relate. In the case of Northern Ireland, it was just, I don't really know why, but I got a rough time. And when I came to England, it was my accent. The videos have been blocked. I'm surprised by that because they used to screen those. But there's another show that's very similar called Seconds from Disaster. I think air crash investigation is a little bit more specific to aviation incidents, whereas Seconds from Disaster includes other disasters, such as the King's Cross Fire of 1987. And we've now got eight people logged in. So if you've just joined, please say hello, please interact, ask me questions. That's how I want us to keep rolling. Well, the main thing, Declan, is just that you feel good in yourself or you just work on it yourself. Brian Sun, hello. Good to see you here. So, guys, I'm going to round this up. Probably, I'll give it another 10 minutes. It really does depend on interaction. So, any questions, anything like that, because that kind of keeps the ball rolling. That's kind of the way I intend to go ahead with these videos. I imagine Halloween will probably be cancelled on some level, probably less trick or treating. But the big thing, of course, with COVID is Christmas. Dominic Hugo, welcome. Do you think the show Can't Pay Will Take It Away should be axed? I have to be honest, I'm not familiar with it. I imagine just from the title, it sounds like one of these cringy reality shows where they expose people, and it's probably something about debt collectors or something. Sounds depressing, to be fair. Um, I don't know the show, so I can't comment in great detail. But if it is like that, I would have a problem with that because okay, people are not paying the rent or whatever, then they can be prosecuted for that. But I don't see why there should be kind of an added stigma of ramming a camera in their face. It just seems a bit sensationalist. But honestly, I don't know much about the show. Is my speculation correct? Is that what it's about? Is it about like loan sharks or um, landlords or something like that? Because just going by the title, it sounds to be that way. Yeah, definitely not a fan of drill. Um, Problem is, Grand Theft Auto games have rap songs like that on the radio stations. Well, I don't play video games, so I'm not surprised from the limited information I have on Grand Theft Auto. I'm not at all surprised that there's a juxtaposition there. Brian, I was bullied as a child being fat, too feminine, or following the rules too strictly. Bullying only became an issue after I grown up. Um, it only became an issue after you'd grown up. Do you mean it was less of an issue when you'd grown up, or you realised it was a problem? I court enforcement officers with a camera crew. Yeah, that's. I mean, the way I see it is, if someone is breaking the rules, then okay, they're subject to fines or whatever. But I don't see why. I don't see why they should go through crew thrust in their face as well. I mean, to me, that's added punishment. I don't know. It just seems sensational. Anthony Joshua was bullied at school. Yeah, Dave Dowland. I mean, really, it's the number of people who are. I reckon. I reckon on some level, most people have had some unpleasant experience, but some more so than others. I just think it's horrendous, and it's so depressing that some young people and some adults as well are driven to the point of taking their own lives. That is just, and it really angers me actually when people say, "Oh, you should just laugh it off," or People who say that need to understand that the victim can try every method. It won't matter. They can try ignoring it. They can try playing along with it. I mean, I have a big problem with that because it puts the onus on the victim, not on those who are doing it. Yeah, I'd agree, Brian. It's a bit like mental health, maybe with something like bullying. We have taken it more seriously recently, which is good. But still think schools, at least here in the UK, are not still too much of an attitude of it's just two students squabbling rather than seeing one as the victim and one as the bully. And it shouldn't be a level playing field. It should be the onus should be on the bully or bullies. I say bullies because more often it's group behaviour than an individual. I mean, the film stereotype of a bully is a big guy, picking on younger kids, but that's not always the case. Bullies can be younger. They're often in a group, so that's a very unpleasant thing when you have gossip and so on against you. I really start to see bullying and also crime taken far more seriously. Well, I don't know about crime. I think the tendency for lenient judgments has definitely been a new thing. Yes, Brian. Just going by your name, I kind of guessed that. I was going to ask actually. Um, so, are you a Chinese national or do you have British citizenship? Um, Definitely, from what I know in China regarding bullying, it's quite a serious problem in Chinese schools. I never directly saw it in my classes, but it is quite a serious problem. Um, I've seen some horrendous things in videos on Weibo and so on, where one kid was even hit with a concrete slab, and the school done nothing about it. Um, and maybe a Confucian ideal around that. I'm not sure, but I do think bullying's a problem the world over. Toronto, okay. Um, Jeremy Pickering, did you follow Brenton Tarrant's sentencing a couple of months ago? Not closely, no. Um, I imagine there were a lot of analogies with that guy in Norway, Anders Breivik, because they both had total disregard for the court proceedings. And I know there was an issue around Australia maybe extraditing him or something, but New Zealand took quite a hard line on that. I don't know what the outcome was, but I think he got the highest sentence ever handed out in a New Zealand court. Not surprisingly, um, I find Anne Robinson from Weakest Link a bit rude to the contestants at times. Yeah, I'd agree with that. She was definitely a bit of a battle axe. The only thing with that is I think it was a bit put on. I'm not sure if I think I didn't really like that style, but I think it was a little bit exaggerated. I'm not sure. Like it's almost like they expected her to be rude. So you used to have charity specials like WWE wrestlers and so on, and yeah, rudeness sells. I mean, there's a show called Dragon's Den, which I know is very popular. I understand that the business world cutthroat. You need to be tough to survive, etc., etc. I just don't like the idea of there's just a mean spiritedness to that, like, you're fired or you're off. Trump, of course, used to do The Apprentice with those sort of with that sort of rhetoric. Um, so, Brian, I assume things are better now. You don't get bullied now? Anyone else? We've been talking about the subject of bullying. What do I think of Jerry Springer? Well, Carl, I think it's trash, to be quite honest. But I will say this: I don't think Jerry Springer is as bad as Jeremy Kyle, because I do think a lot of Jerry Springer. I'm not sure if it's still aired. I do think a lot of it was highly exaggerated, whereas with Jeremy Kyle, more of it really was real world cases. I don't think highly was a failed politician. He actually stood as a Democratic senator at one point, failed, and made his fame through this show. It's very outrageous. I don't think Derek Springer's the first to do it, though he might be the most famous. But back in the 80s was Maury Povich, Geraldo, and people like that were starting to get that sort of confrontational talk show thing coming through. Um, but yeah, basically, I'm not a fan of talk shows in general, with one or two exceptions. Even that Dr. Phil, who on the surface comes across more professional and more yeah, less judgmental and so on. Even he's a bit of a charlatan if you look behind the surface. I mean, there was controversy recently with the actress Shelley Duvall and the way that he interviewed her. When she's famous from The Shining. She may be suffering mental health problems. So generally, I think they're trash, and it's very, very obvious those sort of shows are about sensationalism. One of them, Steve Wilkos show. Steve Wilkos was literally the security guy of it was either the American version of Jeremy Kyle or something else. My question is, well, confrontation for the sake of it. Now, I'm conservative on crime, but I don't believe in turning criminal cases into public entertainment. Yeah, I've always wondered that about Judge Judy. I think it's probably 50-50. I think to some extent it was staged, but I also think how would I react if I met Jeremy Kyle or Gordon Ramsay or Frankie Boyle? Hopefully, I never will. I'd like to say I would be diplomatic and not make a scene, but I can't guarantee it. Honestly, I can't guarantee it, especially with Kyle. Yeah, I can't guarantee it. I think I probably would say something to Kyle like, "So, Jezza, why didn't you show your face?" I always have these images of pretending to be a fan and taking them by surprise, but honestly, yeah, probably never happened. Have you seen Father Ted? Yes, I'm a big fan of Father Ted. My family always liked that show, and it's a pity it didn't last long. Unfortunately, of course, Dermot Morgan died young. But it was a great show. It was very, very funny. I always liked Father Ted. And if anyone else isn't familiar, Father Ted was a comedy. It was an Irish series, but it was very popular in the UK about a group of priests living on a remote island. There was the older senior priest who was an alcoholic and very crude, bad tempered. There was a young, very, very um, gullible priest, Dougal. And then there was the middleman, Ted, who was supposed to be sort of the straight one, but he also got himself into a lot of mishaps. Very funny series. Tomo Cow film and videos. Any of them, what do you think about George Galloway's recent white flight? Guy's a hypocrite and is also denying the Muslim concentration camps in China. Well, I have a very low opinion of George Galloway generally, so we certainly wouldn't seek him out to watch anything of his. White flight, I'm not, is that the name of a show or something? But yeah, I totally agree. The guy is I can't stand George Galloway, to be quite honest. One of my biggest issues with Galloway is he really pontificates, particularly over Iraq. Yeah, this is a man who shook hands with Saddam Hussein. He still denies it. This is a man who has a show that is a subsidiary of Russia Today. I believe it's called Sputnik. Um, I mean, George Galloway, I don't like to use the word traitor, but if such a term can be applied, I think he's a perfect candidate for it. Really can't stand him. Um, and it doesn't surprise me being denial about the Uyghur concentration camps because that's at China's hands. So it's not a convenient way to bash the West. I mean, Galloway is ideologically anti-West, so I think he should just defect to Russia or something and be done with it. I really can't stand him. Did I ever watch Fresh Sprint? Excuse me, Fresh. It was like the opening theme to that show, but I must admit I never watched it in detail. I did like the opening theme. I'm glad Jeremy Kyle got axed. That show was such exploitation. Totally agree, Jeremy. I've never equivocated on my views on Jeremy Kyle, and I think it says a lot that Kyle didn't show his face. And that's a good point, Tomu. If Galloway cannot bring himself to condemn China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims, which is actual persecution, not like anything that goes on in the West, um, then he's just a rank hypocrite. I mean, I've never had a good vibe from Galloway. I mean, this is the thing about George Galloway. He sets up a party called Respect, which is very disrespectful. I mean, they're very, they're a far left party. So Galloway have no time for. And I think it's pretty odious how he pontificates on Iraq. Yet he supports, one of the worst dictators in modern times. There is archival footage showing Galloway meeting Saddam Hussein, and he still denies it. And he literally praised him to his face. Okay, guys, I'll give it a few more minutes, but I do have a lot of things to do today. But yeah, I would say things about this about the likes of George Galloway. They're always bashing the West, and that's fine. We have freedom of speech, but it is hypocritical. I mean, I honestly would say, why don't you just defect around and be done with it? Have I seen the movie Tenet, Carl? Not yet. I'm thinking about that one. There really is a limited choice of films to watch. Um, in the last video I discussed, I was going to watch the David Attenborough documentary. I got to the cinema, and the cheeky buggers wanted to charge £17.50 for a documentary, and it was live stream like this. But that's just extortionate. So obviously, I didn't go ahead with that. Yeah, I kind of want to see Tenet. It wouldn't necessarily be my first go-to film, but there isn't much else out at the moment. The Bond film's being held back until 2021. I might go to see that, the Trial of the Chicago Seven, because I like real life films, but there isn't a great deal to watch right now, to be honest. Have you ever not even wanted to vote in a general election? Um, there's been times I've been disillusioned, but I do feel that voting is a civic duty. And I've been a candidate myself, so I'd be a bit of a hypocrite if I were to advocate not voting. I do understand sometimes it can be difficult to really, especially if you find that you're in disagreement with a lot of party positions. I mean, right now, for example, I'm not aligned to any political party. I'm watching Keir Starmer's Labour closely because I am looking for a good centrist party. I don't think the Liberal Democrats are really that liberal because I don't think they've spoken up on Islamic extremism, for example. And I think they put political correctness above human rights. Um, but I'm watching Starmer's Labour closely. I think Starmer's too close to Black Lives Matter, and there's a few other things I'm not comfortable with. But let's just say I'm watching his Labour Party closely. Um, would you ever do vlogs, walks, of things like to do that to physically bring this laptop outside? And obviously, it depends on weather. And I've just got a message my Wi-Fi is unstable, so I'm not sure if that came through. But once again, Tomo, I certainly would think about it, but it's just not practical with a laptop because I'd have to physically bring it around. But maybe if I get a better phone in the future, I would. Views on Owen Jones. Well, what do I think of Owen Jones? Certainly his politics isn't mine. He's well to the left of myself. I'm a centrist. Owen Jones is socialist. He's well on the left. I don't agree with his views on crime. I know he published a book a few years ago called Chavs, where he's sort of getting into this thing about how, as he put it, the working class are vilified. I think that's a distortion because I think that the whole thing about Chavs is more job culture than the working class. Um, I will say this for Owen Jones, though. Be fair to him, he will stick his neck out. Like I've seen him go to the Conservative conference just to debate with people and so on. So whilst I strongly disagree with many of his politics, I think he has conviction. Um, I don't, like I say, I would take issue with a lot of his politics. How he conducts himself, he's a journalist, he's an activist. I think he's like a lot of people on the left. He's very quick to throw out the racist tag at people, which I have a problem with. But I think he's got conviction. So what else can people do? If they have conviction, they have conviction. I agree with Zionism. That's a complex question. Let me put it in this way. Do I think that the state of Israel should be there? I think that it's got a right to exist. I think it's uniquely threatened. And I think that if people are going to ask questions about the state of Israel, and I don't agree with everything Israel does, but if people are going to question Israel's right to exist, then by the same token, they would have to question Pakistan's right to exist, as that is an Islamic homeland. And I do think, I will say that Israel is uniquely vilified. I think sometimes unfairly so. I don't think any other country on earth would be expected to take rocket attacks and not defend itself. Having said that, there has water, but over time, I've perhaps become a little bit more sympathetic to the Israelis. What's Sunderland like and how big is it? Sunderland, okay, well, how big is it? I assume you mean by population. Sunderland Authority has about 295,000 people. The city of Sunderland, so that's just the city itself, is about 180,000. Um, so what I mean by that is the authority includes Washington. We actually have the original Washington, Bolton and Spring, and Heads in the Hole, which are medium-sized towns. So it's the whole authority. So Carl, you're in Belfast, but it's by English standards, it would be about average, similar into Stockport, Dudley, Milton Keynes, places like that, Norwich. What's it like? Well, there's a lot of things I could say about Sunderland. I've lived here for most of my life. It's not the most glamorous place. Sometimes it's on the wrong side of jokes, but yeah, might have some connection problems today because of the weather. Sunderland, I'll always stress the good things about Sunderland. We have Europe's largest air show. We've impressive beachfront. We have a very good public civic museum, very pleasant public park. But you know, Sunderland is not a wealthy city. It's like a lot of places in the north of England. It's God. So, guys, I'll give this another 5 minutes up to 4 o'clock, and then I'll have to round up. That's interesting. So, do you think antisocial behaviours become a bigger problem, Declan? Am I on Twitter? Hello, Alon. No, sorry, I don't use Twitter. I did have an account for a while, but I find the word limitation was just a bit frustrating because I couldn't vocalize the way I would like to. So, no, I'm not on Twitter. Um, I will say this, and maybe I can talk about more in the next video. There's a new political party being set up. I think it's called Reclaim by the actor Lauren Fox. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to fully endorse it, but I'm interested in it. Interested to see what direction it takes. If you don't know, he is the actor, television, but basically got into an argument with an academic. I think a lot of people might gravitate towards it because they're tired of woke intolerance, for want of a better term. So it'll be interesting to see what direction that takes. It's very, very difficult for a new party to start off. It takes, for example, it took several decades for the Liberal Democrats to get into government from being founded in the late 80s. So, politics takes time. Um, but I'm a political animal. I've always been interested in politics. So just going back to your question, Declan, there's times I'm not overly enthusiastic about any of the candidates, but in that case, I will either go for an independent or I'll go with the least bad option. But I do think that voting is important because it's a civic duty. I mean, if we don't vote, then we can't really complain. To be honest, that's the way I see it. Because voting is an empowerment that many people around the world don't have. I would also say politicians are human. We can't expect them to. They can't please everyone all the time. That is true. Will you make a video on the Armenia Azerbaijan conflict? I might do, but I'd have to consider what angle to take on that. I'm certainly following the situation closely. That's a very troubled part of the world, the Caucasus, since the Nagorno Karabakh War of 1988 to 1994. Do I think a world war could break out in the future? Do I think everyone and everything has the right to be questioned and criticised without? Okay, a lot of questions there. I'll try and address those individually. Alon, I might make a video on that, but I just need to consider what angle to take. Raymond, you think everyone and everything has the right to be questioned and criticised without uh, persecution. I assume you also mean without prosecution. Broadly speaking, yes, I believe everyone. And I'm giving examples here specifically that people tend to put a bubble around. In the case of the King of Thailand, there are actually specific laws that you're forbidden to criticize the king. In the case of Greta Thunberg, I dislike the way her supporters pounce on anyone who dares says anything against her. But yeah, I basically think anyone in the public eye, I don't think anyone's above questioning. Um, I would say though it needs to be done in a responsible way. So criticism has to be legitimate criticism. It can't just be threats, um, because that then gets into something else. And Carl, do you think a world war could break out in the future? Well, in recent years, there's been several flashpoint times. I mean, tensions between the United States and Russia, tensions between China and the United States. Um, every time there's a major international incident, we hear this possibility of a world war. For example, when a Turkish jet was shot down, or sorry, when a Russian jet was shot down over Turkey recently, it again came up. There's been many, well, basically every time there's a major international incident, that question is raised. But to truly be defined as a world war, it needs to involve every power and there needs to be active fighting in every continent. So it's possible, but um, we shouldn't treat every international incident as a potential world war situation because it's not. Um, if there's any potential for a world war, I agree with Fallon at the moment. A second Cold War is more likely between China and the West. However, I think if China tries to retake Taiwan by force, that could be a real flashpoint. Um, but the reality is, for a long time, the possibility of a world war three has been discussed. An interesting thing, actually, about the world wars, Churchill actually described the 7 Years' War of 1756 to 1763 as the first global war, the First World War. Because if you look at those 18th century European conflicts, they had the nature of a world war in them, involved all the great powers, they were fought on several continents, right, and North America. So in that sense, it had, in some ways, the recipes of a Cold War. Um, well, that's true. The Cuban Missile Crisis was very close, but actually, in 1983, there was another very close incident. It's not as famous as the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I believe we also came dangerously close then as well. And there was a Russian, I forget the guy's name now, but sometime in the 1980s, I think it was about 85 or 83, he was in charge of the nuclear deterrent system, i.e., he would be the commander that would make the command for a reprisal rocket. And he saw this rocket coming in, um, or what appeared to be a rocket, and there was 20 different mechanisms for proving if this was authentic or not. 20 different mechanisms. And he had to make this call within minutes whether to order a retaliatory strike against the United States. He made the judgment that it was a mistake, and it turned out that that was right. It was just a solar flare on the panels. Well, he was subsequently punished by the Soviet Union for disobeying orders or for embarrassing them, but he's subsequently been described as the man who saved the world. It's a connection problem with this live stream. There might be, it's either here, and I've been told that there are some connection problems. So apologies for that. I think a global conflict will happen eventually, Declan. I think it's possible. It's now been 75 years since World War II. There was 21 years between the two world wars. I think it's possible, but it won't be necessarily each international incident will be World War III. It would have to involve all the major powers and involve fighting in every continent. Yeah, I'd agree, Alan. I think we need to take it with a pinch of salt. However, I do think it isn't just the Middle East. If we look at the China Sea, that could be a real flashpoint area. I mean, one thing about conflict today, there's actually fewer wars in the world today than there were even in the 1970s or the 1990s. So the world is actually more peaceful than people think. However, do I think they will bring back the draft? Well, unlikely. I think it would only be in a total war situation, but certainly not. We have a professional army in this country. I don't think it would bring back the. Have I read much of Tolkien? When I was very young, I think I read The Hobbit. I found, to be honest, I found it quite long-winded. I didn't really get into it. I quite like the films, but I can't say I'm a massive fan of Tolkien, if I'm being honest. I mean, I appreciate the creative biographical books, although I probably should read more fiction. Okay, guys, I'm going to round this up. I'll take one more question. One more question. I do have a lot to do today. One more question, anyone? And I'll have to leave it at that. So these are all good questions. Thanks for bringing them in. I imagine you guys are all based in the UK or close enough. Should Turkey be kicked out of NATO? I have a big problem with President Erdogan. I think he's a thug and a demagogue. But it's a difficult question. Turkey obviously is geopolitically very important for the West, so it wouldn't be a simple case of just kicking them out. But I would like to see the back of Erdogan. He's a dictator. I think he's a thug. He's the worst sort of nationalist. He stokes up the Turkish diaspora in Germany and the Netherlands. Um, I've no time for Erdogan, but should Turkey be kicked out? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Cheers, Dominic. I appreciate that. And Carl, yes, I've seen all the Lord of the Rings films. Um, okay, Alon. So that's interesting to hear your perspective. I mean, I respect Turkey. I think it's a great country, and I think Erdogan's bringing it back. Erdogan. I'm not sure how his name is pronounced. It's Erdogan, actually. Um, Certainly with his Islamist credentials. I think he's a liability for Turkey, to be quite honest. I mean, I watched the events of that 2016 coup d'etat closely. It was very troubling to see literally thousands of people arrested, hundreds of journalists arrested. I mean, Turkey these days is definitely going down a dark path with this man in charge. Okay, guys, I'll have to round this up because I do have a lot to do today. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, and I'll do this periodically. So, thank you. Have a good day, everyone.